I want to just share that I am so grateful for the work I do. I am so grateful for other people being willing to explore with me. And in today's episode, I have invited two people to join me to explore some of their patterns. And it was so much fun. We got to really play with these patterns that existed for both of them in different ways around protecting themselves, staying small, kind of hiding, numbing. And the result of that pattern is the always seeking, looking for answers, trying to fix. So maybe you can relate to this experience you have where there's this dampening who you are, this hiding who you are, this feeling constricted or containing this energy, and, instead noticing this rigidity that you find yourself stuck in. And in a way, how are you then getting in your way? So, this podcast, I want to invite you to listen along and also notice your own experiences. See if you can be working alongside us as Beth and Macayla are revealing some of their own experiences. What's happening for you? If you need support, download the experiential guide for some more guidance. That's a great way to just cue yourself ongoingly, not just in this podcast, on how you can explore your patterns. And hopefully, what Michaela and Beth share offers more insights into understanding your own experiences and ways on how you can work with it so you can actually pan out and create more space around your humanness and all the many different layers that exist within your experience. So, let's dive in, see where Michaela and Beth go, and see where you also go in your experience. What I'm really excited about with this episode is first off, it's new for me to be doing this, to be inviting two pretty much strangers. Michaela, I know you from social media, and Beth, I've met you once at a workshop, but this is very new for me to just be welcoming randoms onto a podcast and for us to explore patterns together. And my intention with it is that by other people hearing what the two of you have to share, they can notice some relatability. And by how we explore the patterns that are there for you, they then also gain more insight into how to support their own curiosities around their patterns. So that's my overarching intention today. We'll see what happens because I have no idea what's going to happen. But to start, what I'd love to do is have each of you introduce yourselves and just share a little bit about like who you are. Just your name's fine, unless you want to go into full backstory, but I don't know if we have time for that. But who you are, where you find yourself currently stuck, what you'd love to be different in how you navigate life, and yeah, anything you're currently doing to support yourself.
If you want to go first or me? Or actually, not really, but I will. Okay, go. Yeah, my name's Beth. Um, I'm actually using a few other names, Elle and Ellie. They're all derivatives of my name, Elizabeth. So exploring that. Where I'm stuck. So I've had a nervous system that's lived in a lot of sympathetic tone, um, and recently understanding that freeze is also something that happens. So it's not just fleeing or fighting. There's freeze, and that was from Nicole's workshop. And just some patterning that comes up around feeling. I guess it is that freeze in the moment when probably parts of me that are younger that I'm working on or working with get activated, and so starting to pay attention to what's happening in my body when that's happening. Everything from like, you know, very shallow breathing, feeling like this hardcore inside me, hard to think. So that comes up at times when those younger pieces get activated, and recognizing that, pausing, and being able to move through that more quickly than, you know, 6 months ago, a year ago. And I'm supporting myself by working with I've worked with a few different people, counselors who do IFS and some somatic work. A lot that I do on my own. I listen to a lot of things. I try things on my own. Um, and I have some practices that support me, but a lot of them are doing. They're doing things, being active. So that's part of my pattern too, is when I'm feeling a certain way, it's like, okay, do something physical, and try and problem solve my way through it. So those are just some of where I've been working with
Amazing. Are you also willing to share right now in this moment, Beth, what it is you're experiencing?
right now.
Mhm.
Oh yeah. I mean, I have some good material that I came into this with. Um,
So I'm going to invite you to notice the difference in between the good material versus what in this moment are you noticing?
what am I noticing in this moment?
Yeah.
I am noticing that, oh yeah, I mean, I feel very like I'm just contained. Everything feels contained. It's sort of
Mhm.
my breathing is from here. There's no diaphragmatic breathing happening. I could feel my heart pounding. Feel like my throat, my fingers, my hands are shaking a bit.
Mhm.
I don't feel fully open in my throat. Yeah, my whole it's like there's this central core of hardness within, my body and my torso.
Beautiful.
Mm,
Thanks.
yeah.
Yeah, and this is where it's like, you came in before the call, you had something go on, and you came in with some activation, and it's like, oh, is that activation a result of that? Is it just something that's always there? Sometimes it's louder, sometimes it's quieter. Is it a result of being on the call? It doesn't matter, and that's a big way I really like to explore is like, okay, well, what's happening in the moment? And then if we need to bring in context of why, we will, but it's pretty amazing what happens when we just learn to listen to what you just described and start to bring some curiosity into that. So just naming that. So thank you for such a great description of what's happening in your physiology right now. Yeah. Awesome. Anything else you want to add?
Oh, no, I just need to just that urge to noticing that urge to take a breath and
Mm,
expand. There's so much contraction. I feel like my ribs are
mhm.
yeah.
So before we shift to Michaela, I just want to point out this impulse you have to breathe and noticing if the impulse comes from the contraction. Or is it you want to breathe to create some relief in the contraction? Because those are 2 different things. And as we explore a little bit more, we'll be able to recognize these conflicting experiences we have or these impulses we have. But this is just a great example, so I'm gonna point it out, right? Because we can have this contraction and then something else wants to take a breath to relieve the contraction, but the contraction's like, no, 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 I need to stay braced and tense and holding, right? So then we have this conflict of wanting to breathe to create space while something else is wanting to really be in the contraction. Versus what can happen when we pay attention to what we're experiencing is a breath might naturally come,
Mm.
and then that shifts the contraction. You see the difference?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So would you say that the breath that wanted to happen was from the contraction, paying attention to it, something wanted to shift, or was it the breath wanted to happen to create relief, even though the contraction wants to keep happening?
No, it was the former, the
Yeah.
first. Yeah,
Cool. So something shifted, the breath allowed some of that contraction to change.
yeah.
Great. Awesome. Love it. All right. Michaela, want to share a little bit about, yeah, who you are or really the patterns you find yourself stuck in?
Hey, I'm Macayla. I guess so my whole life I've had like a nervous system dysregulation, not being aware of it, totally naive to what this unhinged energy is, thinking that it was just normal to everybody, but really caught in my head. And over the last 20 years, 25 years of working as a wellness practitioner, massage, and more mental stress relief, I guess, is my practice, that I've been able to nurture that in myself through my work, I guess, as a mastery, and learn how to be more absorbing of the energy around me and still the mind so I can take more in and not just be in such a fight or flight mentality all the time. It's pretty exhausting. So, I mean, I still have those things, but like leaps and bounds since I was 20, and more unhealthy behaviors to mask and to relieve maybe some of that nervous energy. And now it's definitely more focused on like your body is your temple, like nurture the bones of your being, and like that is going to make a difference instead of the unhealthy patterns, of course. But overall, I would say I would say that my limiting pattern is that I just don't feel like it's ever enough. Like, and there's so many things that I want to do that I'm like, I haven't done that yet. I planned on doing that last year. I want to make these like more wellness videos, but it's like, I'm like, I don't know. I don't have anything to say, or what I have to say isn't good enough, or it's just me. What do I have to offer? Like those kind of patterns, I don't know. I think that's where I'm stuck because I do feel so confident in other ways. And then when it comes to this, it's like, it's like you just can't move past it for some reason.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't say that's mine. I definitely am addicted to putting myself out there. My pattern would be getting out of my comfort zone because they're like, okay, on the other side of this is the sweet nectar. But then time and time again, I'm like, where's the sweet nectar? It hasn't enough yet. That's not it yet. I don't know. So I would feel like that's where a block would be. But yeah, with the medicine wheel, the 4 directions, yeah, I wouldn't be sitting here without that. That was really heart opening and brought up a lot, like overwhelmingly brings up stuff that you have to purge out in order to move forward. I mean, I'm really into the tuning forks, and I used to be not like, can't see it, don't believe it. But then it is unbelievable, the tuning forks and being able to regulate the vibrational energy through that is pretty mind blowing. So I think that's like my most interested facet right now. But yeah, I've pretty much tried all the modalities to work through things, and it has worked like leaps and bounds. It's all worked really well, but there's still always some sticky stuff inside that like is blocking being able to move forward for whatever reason it is. And I think it has to do a lot with social media, which is weird that I'm right here doing this right now because of the being judged. So like the ability to freely express is a part of that whole blockage, because social media can be like a pretty harsh place. So the being judged, I don't know, blah, blah.
Yeah. The stories run deep, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to share what you're in this moment experiencing after sharing all that and just being here? What's there? What do you
Yeah, I
notice?
oddly feel quite calm and like happy and energetic to be here. I expected, because of every other time I've been involved in something like this, to feel quite nervous, to feel quite clammed up, unwilling to probably share. Like in the medicine wheel, there's only 10 of us, and I was definitely the least person to share. I'd be like, okay, great, next person, So
Everything's fine, thanks.
everything's fine. I'm good. I'm not good. That's why I'm not sharing or whatever. But I feel good and I feel happy to be here, and I feel calmer than expected. So I'm noticing that, I feel like there's a little bit of a buzz happening under the chest, but overall pretty calm, pretty happy.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. So what I want to explore a little is, what both of you are sharing is it's like you're doing all these things and yet there's still a curiosity of understanding yourself more. So what I'd love to do is like help you understand yourself more so that you have more of an ability to see, and sometimes this is annoying because you don't need to see more layers. You're like, I already see so much and I'm aware of so much, but how do we come to these underlying tones of our patterning and the impact that the way our nervous system is wired is having on how we live, and how do we meet those? To me, what it feels like is the underlying tones. um I remember when I first got into somatic experiencing, just being like, oh, this is what I'm trying to pay attention. Like, this is what needs support. This is what I want to really attune to. So that's my hopes, is for you to learn another layer of what you can attune to within your experience. Okay. So my original plan with this podcast is to play with this patterning of like trying all the things and reading all the books and doing all the working with all these different practitioners. But what I'm more drawn to, because to me that's more like a superficial layer, where it's like, yeah, we're just out here trying to find the answers, but let's actually drop in to what needs supporting to see if the pattern of always seeking changes. Okay. So I'm going to kind of switch directions a little and not necessarily work with that pattern, but work more with what the two of you just expressed. And I have some ideas on how we can get curious. So there's this practice I like to play with, and this is where I'm drawn to start, is for us to notice, both of you kind of shared aspects of this, but how there's energy underneath, but it's being contained. Can you both relate to that? Right? And
Yeah.
usually the containment can be felt, and then it also shows up in our patterning, right? So we hide, right? Macayla, you talked about, not wanting to show up on social media, even though another part wants to. There's this like, stay small, don't show yourself, be fine, carry on, move on to someone else, right? And Beth, you expressed it as well, where there's this like limiting both within your body, and you're now becoming more aware of the freeze that's there, where there's this containment present, while then also doing other things to make you feel alive, like being active and in that go, go, go energy, right? So what I want to invite us to pay attention to is kind of this braking system that's doing a few things, and we'll discover as we explore a little bit more. But how do we explore this kind of containment that exists? What's underneath it, and what's the intention of that braking system? And it's cool because it kind of matches what I talked about in the last podcast with a bunch of people I've worked with for a while, where it's an ongoing journey with freeze, right? It's an ongoing journey of staying small, hiding, um, showing up in our patterns instead of in what feels true to us, right? There's this ongoing journey of shedding the layers and remembering how to just be ourselves. So that's what I'm drawn to explore today. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Sounds great.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I'll get you to start by just explaining, how do you notice yourself containing? How do you notice yourself in what I'm describing as like a braking system or a dampening system? How do you notice that?
I can start.
Okay.
For me, it's like this core part of me just starts to contract. So everything like rib cage, row. It's like I'm being cinched in from the outside. Like I'm putting on this, I don't know, brace, corset. Yeah, I was gonna say girdle, and I'm like, that's such an old word. I've never worn a guy, but yeah, yeah. It's like a corset, and it's the core of me. It is the core of me
Yeah,
that
great.
gets tight. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's very somatic. You can really feel it in your body.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So what I'll invite for those listening is to see if you can relate to what Beth is sharing, or maybe you have your own version of it. Like, how do you, notice containment or dampening or constricting, whatever word lands for you. How about you, Macayla?
I do feel it in my throat. I'd say, like, I always get, like, I even had it earlier this morning. It's like, I don't know, is it like phlegmy? Is it lumpy? Like, it just feels like it's stuck in like some goo that it's not going to be able to express, Or like I've often, things happen in your life, and I feel like with each happening that you feel aren't as naive and free anymore, that there's been like a shield, like a armor shield that just like goes up, and it's like steel door up, another one up, and it's like well, steel's really hard to break down, it turns out, so I just feel like it's like kind of caught in a, like, I envision it like a steel cage sometimes, and like this, at least it's rusting out and getting thinner as the years go on, but yeah, it's like a steel cage, and like definitely like thicker in the throat. It sounds disgusting, but like that is kind of how it is.
I love that
Like
description.
I've been at times where I've been so dampened and so disheartened by being in this pattern and recognizing it time and time again that it almost makes you fatigued and sick, like physically, like fatigue, like adrenal fatigue or like excessive fatigue, I would say, is how mine comes out often in that
Mm.
way.
And that's quite common, right? And one way we describe this is there's gas and break at the same time. So there's underneath this containing, there's all this energy,
Mhm.
right? And we're trying to contain all that energy. So there's these conflicting forces at play. And when there's these conflicting forces at play, then the rest of the system also gets impacted, right? So it's quite common to struggle within our health and feeling like ourselves when those forces are at play.
So
And what I've experienced is, I don't like to use the word all people, but most people are navigating this conflict in some form. Some, really strongly, others quite mildly, but for the most part, there's always this conflict at play of the brake and the gas. Mm.
yeah, right. Finding a
Yeah.
balance.
Nicole,
Yeah,
Nicole, can I ask a question?
of course.
So I don't know if this is right. So when I'm feeling that constriction, that's the break.
Hmm.
So I'm now like, what's me putting my foot on the pedal?
Hmm.
Is that the do? Overdo,
No.
think? No.
Yeah, great question. So this is a great example of like, okay, there's two dynamics happening within your system at once, right? So some contraction and some gas. We haven't dove into that yet. We're going to go there in a
Okay, sorry.
sec. Okay. No, that's okay. But I appreciate your question because that's what's one of the things that's happening. But on top of that, then to try to create some relief or to try to find some answers, then we go out and, you know, go, 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 or seek, 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 seek. Try this modality, try that modality, go for a run, go for a cold plunge. It's like I'm trying to find the answers by using my tuning forks and trying to fix the thing by doing all these things when there's this internal dynamic at play. So I like to see ourselves like my human experience consists of many different realities, right? So what we're playing with right now is this break in gas conflict is one reality. One is there's some onness, some sympathetic tone, while the other is a braking system on top of that. That's more of the dorsal tone. Right? So that's one dynamic at play, two different realities. One wants to be go, 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 go underneath while the braking system's on top. Then another reality is I want this to be different. So I'm seeking out all the modalities or I'm doing all the things that I feel will help me. And many of them do. I do want to point out like a lot of the modalities we practice or a lot of the self care or, resources we rely on are really important. They're in their own field in a way. Whereas what we're going to play with today is this conflict that's at play, that's stuck in time and stuck in this dance that they're doing. So we'll, in a moment, Beth, reveal a little more of that gas energy. Okay. Make sense?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Cool. So what we're going to play with now is, and anyone can play with this, and this is what's so brilliant about our experience. The more we pay attention to our experience, we can play with some edges here. And what I mean by that is the braking system is on for a reason, right? So the containing that we're experiencing or the dampening or the brake or, the steel armor, or for me, it's a wall of protection, right? They're all there for a reason. Okay. And so far we've explored how we notice them. And now we're going to play with it just a little bit. So I'm a big fan of doing things really subtly, because when we do things really subtly, we can notice the nuances of the changes that happen. And it allows, because for our nervous system to rewire, we need to work within the subtleties so that it's safe enough for something different to start to be programmed. If we just rip a band-aid off, then there's more of a discombobulation, a confusion, and it can be hard to reorient, and we can end up, spiraling for a while. So we're going to play in a way where we're just playing on an edge, and we're going to see what happens. Okay. And what I want to point out is we're not using any content here. We're not using story of any kind. We're just coming to the physiology and noticing what's happening. And we're going to just play with that and see what happens next. Okay.
Okay.
Woohoo. Okay. So we can do this together. And those listening, you're welcome to explore this as well. And then I'll just get you to both share what you notice. Okay. So Beth, for you, it's this containment, right? This contracting that's happening in the core of the body. Macayla, there's a few different experiences, but you've got the shield, you've got the throat mucusy thing, right? You've got a few different layers you can pay attention to. To start, you're gonna just think about the idea of doing this. So you're not actually going to do it. The idea of whatever constriction, containing, dampening you're experiencing, if you were to do it a tiny, tiny, tiny bit less, if you were to imagine doing it a tiny bit less, what shows up? So just notice.
Freer, probably. It's like a sense of relief or like.
Okay. So notice if you can feel that relief in your body right now, or is it something else?
Yeah, I could. I was like, if I felt a little bit less, that would be like a Care Bear stare of like the
Right.
brakes. It's shining through the brakes,
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so a little bit less brings on this experience of more freeness, Care Bear stare, and just there's a softening. Is there soft? Yeah, beautiful. Cutting through the brass. Is it brass, not steel? That's right. I was like trying to remember what metal it was. Right. So then from there, you can notice, like, does the muscle tone change? Does the fascia change? The connective tissue? Are the bones different? Is the viscera different? Is the tension in the throat different? Or is it just a part that feels more freedom? So sit with
it's
that.
interesting because I coughed right after I said that. So, maybe it's
Yeah.
making it, I don't know.
Yeah. So you can notice the cough and then notice the experience. Does it feel different?
Yeah, it feels like, yeah, I don't know. I feel like I feel it more in like, I feel like suddenly it would be like more of the cracks shining through than like anything in the throat. I feel more relief in the solar plexus thinking about that.
Cool. Okay. I like it. We'll come back. We'll keep exploring. So
Can I just quickly share?
please, Beth.
When you said you're not going to do it, I'm just going to, I can't remember how you worded it.
Just
Right
the
away,
idea.
activated, more activated for me. I was like, more freeze.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's
I
what
thought,
I
oh no, I'm
expected.
doing this wrong. I'm doing this wrong. Oh no. It's like, uh-oh, no. I know you said subtle. Didn't matter.
So that's going to be a very common experience. So it's great. I love that both of you are here because we get two very different experiences. And often that containment is there for a reason. So when we're playing with the idea of doing it less, we get to notice what's underneath. So what you're expressing is flavors of where you're stuck on the threat response cycle, which I talk about in the second episode, right? And it's probably some panic, some fear, maybe even terror, right? And it's showing you indicators of why that containment is there.
Yeah.
Does that make
And I'm
sense?
sorry, it does. And I'm feeling like I'm gonna cry about this. Like
Yeah.
this recognizing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And this is what I was talking about, right? So the more we can understand the deeper layers that are at play and how we're our physiology is stuck trying to protect us from feeling the intensity of what we may have experienced in the past, but it became too much. So in came that braking system to protect us from feeling how big and, yeah, too much that was, right? And I love that there's tears there because that allows there to be more of a recognition of what's happening and why it's happening. And to me, what I hear in that and feel in that is then more space and maybe even some understanding for why that contraction is always there.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel a softening, like the tears, once I realized what's happening and I spoke it, it allowed space for the
Beautiful.
tears and the softening and
Yeah.
more compassion.
Yeah. So, what you're describing, Beth, is a very titrated way to move into what's underneath that bracing. And the way I describe this is you moved through a little bit of a wave of it, right?
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
we're containing, containing, containing. And then by exploring it in this subtle way, something can change and something shifts. And now the containment doesn't need to be there as much.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I feel that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
for
the
sure.
so the containment is less, there's more space, there's more compassion for the experience.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
literally my rib cage can expand a bit more with each breath.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I love it. So without having to tell yourself to take a breath, something changes. There's less need to be in the bracing and the breathing can come.
Yeah, I'm not thinking my way through this. I'm
Yeah,
feeling it.
exactly. Yeah. And this is why I love working with the physiology in this way is
Mm.
like we don't need to know what happened. We're just playing with the pattern that's in the body, and it allows you to move through the layers that are at play. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then for Macayla, it's just a different experience where it's like, oh, there's this habitual pattern of protecting myself, and if it's there a little less, I'm free. It's possible, Macayla, that if we dug a little bit more, you might also notice some aspects of the threat response cycle. And that's what I'm
Oh,
kind of,
yeah, I've been there. I climb right up and I almost like feel angry in those moments. It brings on like a frustration and like in the medicine wheel, I experienced that a lot. It was just like a lot of frustrations that I couldn't blow through the steel walls and like not move past it. So I can't write that poetry, about whatever, or like whatever that thing was. And it's just like, I have experienced like that level of frustration comes up, I think most.
yeah. And this is something I speak to often, and I find it really helpful to differentiate. Like, here's this thing that is stuck in time, doing what it thinks it needs to do, right? So for Beth, you've got the center column kind of bracing. Macayla, you've got the brass shield, right? And then we have how we feel towards these patterns that live inside of us. So we've got this thing stuck in time being like, I have to be a shield or else I'm going to die, right? Like whatever it is, whatever's at the core of it, right? And at the core is the actual trauma, right? The shield is protecting us from feeling the intensity of the trauma. Then we have our personal judgments towards how we're feeling. And it doesn't always have to be judgments. It could be that we have compassion. It could be that, we're showing love for whatever it is we're experiencing. But what I like to pay attention to in that experience is when is it rooted in having an agenda? When is it rooted in trying to fix who I am and how I'm stuck in protecting myself. So that frustration you expressed, Macayla, right? It's like, oh, I'm so frustrated and I so badly want this to be different. But then the shield's like, hell no, I'm not going to be different.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll get thinner and thinner, but no, I still need to be here. Right. And we can do all kinds of practices and all kinds of things to try to change what we're experiencing. But we're in conflict ultimately with what we're experiencing. So I find it really helpful to notice the different layers that are at play, right? The trauma at the core of it, the way we've learned to protect ourselves or manage and control or distract so that we're not feeling the intensity of whatever it is we're stuck in. And then we have how we feel towards it and these agendas we may have, or these frustrations we have, or, just the want for things to be different. And what I like to do from there is pan out even more and just see the bigger picture. So, see all these dynamics at play where we see and acknowledge, like, yeah, it makes sense that you're frustrated. It makes sense that you're trying anything, everything to make this to be different, right? It makes sense that you want to show compassion and love for it, but also at the same time are so sick of being in this pattern,
Exactly that.
right?
Yeah.
So by panning out, we can hold the bigger picture. And I find the more we're able to pan out, the more we can land in a place where we can be the empathic witness for ourselves instead of being caught in trying to make it be different.
Mhm.
So I'm curious if the two of you can notice this ability to pan out and see the layers at play and share a little bit about how you notice your experience when you're more panned out and you see all the layers at play. And I invite anyone listening to do the same. Like, how do you notice that this might feel different than when you're in the frustration or when you're, caught in the pattern and then in conflict with the pattern?
Um, I noticed that as soon as you said pan out, it was like I wasn't just this core within like this hard central core. It was so much more expansive, and I could see the other parts of my body, the parts of my body that are out here, like my skin, and I felt even beyond my body physically, and it was so instantaneous that I became a witness and not the person, not the object. So that
Amazing.
was a huge shift.
Amazing. I love it. So what I'm hearing in that is you're finding this place where you can be the witness, you can experience yourself as whole while noticing all the different many realities that exist. And you're able to notice what's more coherent and what's less coherent and stuck in survival.
Yeah, it allowed space for all of it. It allowed space for the compassionate witness, but it also allowed space for the contraction to exist. Like they're both existing in this beautiful container, which didn't feel so beautiful a couple minutes ago.
Yeah,
It felt like a steel vat that I was stuck in.
beautiful. Yeah, I love it.
I feel like when I've kind of been practicing with more, I don't know if it's panning out, but just like jumping away from myself or being away from myself and giving the frustrations, the steel walls, just giving it more forgiveness instead of being so critical about it. Like just being more forgiving and accepting that it's there, I feel is going to soften it over time more than just this frustration of knowing it's there and the self criticalness of experiencing it. Um, but having more forgiveness, more compassion, laying flowers on all those frustrations and hoping that they turn into, a garden and not a graveyard. I don't know, it's like more compassion and just more acceptance. I think that this is it. And holding frustration just kind of makes those steel walls thicker.
Mhm. Are you willing to play with this just a little, Michaela?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a few things I noticed. One, when you started sharing, there was a reflection on this. Okay. So the reflection on having more compassion and forgiveness for your experience. Does that make sense? It's
Yep.
like reflecting on the times you do this. What I'm going to invite you to do is see if you can pan out in this moment and notice if there's anything you experience by doing it right now. And the reason why I'm kind of naming this is because sometimes forgiveness and compassion can still want things to be different.
Mhm.
So I'm going to get you to pan out a little bit more and acknowledge that you have this practice that you currently implement that allows you to have forgiveness and have compassion and lay the flowers down, right? But pan out and see if you can see that part of you that practices doing that.
Mhm.
Can you feel how it's slightly different if you pan out outside of that and just acknowledge the parts of you that are trying to forgive or that are forgiving and holding compassion?
And it's a nicer spot to be, that's for
Uh,
sure. Feels better to
so
be there.
so what's different? What do you notice by panning out and acknowledging the parts that are forgiving and having compassion?
Uh, Acknowledging them, like, yeah, maybe, I don't know. Like, maybe there's a bit of sadness watching it all from being panned out, like,
Mhm.
I'm getting choked up or
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
So beautiful. And that's part of the more we pan out, the more we connect into the grief.
totally.
Right? The more there's this witnessing and holding of the grief and the sorrow that exists, as well as the love, right? And the praise. But we're doing it in a way where we're not entangled in it and having grief in the entangled experiences of it. We're in this more expansive, I call it more of a collective grief, as well as our individual grief of what we're experiencing.
Mm.
Um, and there's a real spaciousness and beauty to that, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think yeah, it's like the sadness or the in getting choked up is like a beautiful thing about acknowledging the stickiness, but then the sadness, it's there. It's like a mixed ball of
Mhm.
emotions,
Yeah, totally, totally. So the
Hey,
reason why I
Nicole,
wanted
may
to
I? Sorry.
yeah, go for
Oh,
it.
what I'm noticing is the physiological experience of allowing is something about allowing that is not about doing.
Mhm,
It's about being and noticing. When I allowed all of that and panned out, like you gave me permission to pan out actually. um, that allowing softened everything, but I wasn't trying to soften. And it physiologically, there was such an immediate shift in that allowing physical, every like not just physically on every probably, neurochemically, everything.
mhm.
And I felt that.
Yeah, beautiful. And I love that you point that out. There's an ease to it.
Yes.
It doesn't mean it's easier, but there's an ease to how we hold what's happening. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. So, Michaela, can you tell how when you're in the forgiveness and in the compassion, there's still some effort involved in it?
Oh yeah, there's effort. It's like
Uh-huh.
changing your it's like a mind's trying to change your mindset from telling yourself one thing for
Yeah.
so long and then forgiving it for thinking it for so long, like there's
Yeah.
things in that for sure. And it feels way
Yeah.
lighter and lighter. And it's like in the direction of, where you want to be for sure.
Yeah. And this is where it gets tricky because we think, we're holding space for experiences and we're having compassion and gratitude and forgiving, but we're still in the flavor of having an agenda or deeper wanting something to change.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
And it can be sticky, like you said, right? And we kind of have to tease out and pan out even further. And to me, it's the ongoing practice of acknowledging what is. And the more I can acknowledge what it is, I can kind of see the more expansive experience and the many layers that exist at the same time. That's very different than when I pan out and float away and move more into a bypassing state, right? Where everything is fine and I am one with this infinite love and grief, and I am whole, and right. But what we're doing here is we're panning out while still holding all the experiences that exist within us. And sometimes for those listening, if you're also having a harder time understanding what the hell I'm talking about with this idea of panning out, notice if there's conflict. Notice if there's hesitancy or there's that like trying to pull back inward, or a lot of the time some of our patterns are so intense that they pull like they don't want to not be the main experience.
Yeah.
Say that again.
The magnetic force trying to
Exactly.
yeah.
So do either of you notice that kind of the pull back in, or are you able to stay? Yeah. So let's just play with that for a moment. Move back in towards that magnetic force, that pull back in, and just see what that's like. Where you're moving back towards one of your vortexes or back towards being in your survival pattern, whether it's in the physiology or something that's, in conflict with what's happening in the physiology. And what do you notice when you go back into that magnetic force?
I don't want to be there.
It's
Interesting.
like,
The dungeon.
right? It's like, wait a minute, why would I live like this?
Yeah.
Yeah, we find ourselves stuck in it all the time, spiraling in our experiences, caught within these dynamics that are at play within the ways we've learned to protect ourselves, or in this context, what we're playing with is, more of that contain experiences while also having all these experiences underneath.
You know, it was
So,
so interesting. Sorry.
yeah,
That's
please,
okay.
no, don't be. Yeah.
Is that when you said now go back into that space? It was a different experience. Before, I felt like I had no control over it. And this time I was intentionally going back into what that felt like. And it felt different. All the sensations were, well, I mean, I could still feel that core contraction and I got smaller and smaller, but there was effort in doing that. Whereas before it was effortless to have all these sensations and that, you know, signaled I was in freeze. Does that make
Amazing.
sense?
Uh-huh. And what I love in that is, here's a great example of how simple yet powerful this work can be. All you did was all you did, but rode a tiny wave, right? While navigating this dance you were doing in between, containing the intensity of what you were experiencing because it felt like it was going to be too much. By just imagining a little less of the containment, you rode a little wave of that energy, and now it's different. It lives differently within the story in your cells, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what's so powerful with this work. I find, like, now that's different. But yeah, it's, with, I find sometimes with other modalities, it's like we're working through pieces, but then I find myself back in the pattern again, right?
It
Whereas
feels
this,
like home, kind of. Like I'm noticing, like,
totally,
oh, as much as you don't want to be there, it's familiar and it feels like home. Like
yeah,
home I don't necessarily want to be in, but it's familiar and there's cozy nooks in there that you stay in, but it's not where you
exactly.
want to be. But
Yeah,
when you come back in, I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, it's familiar. I'm here. I know this place,
yeah,
It's
yeah,
not actually that scary. It's totally confining. It's limiting. It's a lot of things, but it's familiar at the same time. So
exactly. And air quotes safe, right?
yeah, air
It's
quotes safe.
perceived as air quote safe. Yeah.
Not healthy and not where you want to be, but there's protection around you. It is, whether it's the corset protecting you or the steel walls protecting you, it's safe. You're not going to get in trouble there. It's going to be quiet, probably lonely, all these other things, but it's like not going to,
It's there with intention.
yeah.
Yeah. So I want to play, Macayla, I want to play with that with you for a moment, right? Because there's a number of different ways we can work with it. With Beth, she rode through a wave and now something's different. There's a reorganizing, and you get to be in the world in a different way. Another way we can work with it, with this brass wall that's there, is ask the question, what is it, the brass wall? So you have to ask the brass wall because other parts can definitely answer. But what is the brass wall afraid will happen if it's not there? And just see if an answer comes.
Yeah, I think it's maybe the to be noticed, right? With the steel wall up, it almost makes you small. Maybe without the steel wall, you're going to be noticed or it's vulnerable. Um,
Can I ask a question with that? Was that the brass wall answering or you answering?
I feel like it's the brass wall. Like without it, it's going to feel like what's raw or like
Uh-huh.
exposed, right? Like
Okay.
that wall.
Perfect.
The wall's not there. It's going to feel like you're almost naked and vulnerable standing
Yeah.
there. I don't know.
Yeah. So ask the brass wall how long it's been doing this job for. How long has it been protecting you from being in this raw, vulnerable, naked state and really protecting you from being seen?
I think it's been just in the like, I think 20 years. I think
Okay.
before that, I was like a wild and free being. And over the course of time and becoming an adult and less, naive to the world or like more aware of people around me. I think that slowly and relationships and falling apart relationships and experiences that, are up and down up to a certain point of your life. Well, my life anyway, I didn't need any walls. There nothing could happen substantially to like make walls. I was like free and wild and whatever. And I think slowly over time with different experiences, the wall started, but I could probably go back to like 20 years. I feel like I could tell when the first section of the wall was built,
Yeah. Yeah. So this is where it gets interesting because we can think back and reflect on what our experience is with our patterning, right? And I want to point out the difference of thinking back and trying to make sense of versus just noticing what is and what answers come from that. So I'm going to ask you a very different question. Okay. And I want to see if you can have the wall answer, and it might not make sense.
Okay.
Okay. So ask the brass wall what year it thinks it is, and whatever number first just comes.
I don't know. It said 2001. Like,
Okay.
that. Like,
Perfect.
where are we right now? I don't even know when that was.
That's great. So that's a different answer than I think it's 2001.
Okay, yeah.
You see the difference?
Yeah.
So one is us thinking, trying to figure out what the answer might be, even though it makes sense. Whereas the other is like the wall giving us information,
Interesting.
right? So
Yeah. You
let it
almost don't
know.
want to say it because you're just like, what? I have no idea why that year,
Yeah, yeah. And timeline wise, it makes sense with what you guessed, which was 20-ish years, right? Like for 20 years, right? So there's another way we can work with our survival patterns by inquiring into, the intentions that they have for being there and getting more insight into, how old do they think we are? This is more internal family systems pieces, but I find it really helpful to differentiate myself from the pattern by doing that because it allows me to see like, oh, here's this part of me that's stuck in time that's like, oh, we got to put the brass wall up. And maybe it already knows that it's 2024 and it's been doing this for, 13 years, but there's something that it's caught in from 2001, right? 2001. Right? And it doesn't need totally. And it doesn't need to make any sense, but it allows us to separate ourselves from it a little bit more. Same thing, like panning out, where there's a bit more space of like, oh, interesting. This has been there for a while. So we've played with our patterns in a few different ways, right? We've played with noticing how they show up in our body, this idea of doing it a little bit less. Right? We've played with panning out and noticing how we feel towards our patterns, panning out even more and noticing how we feel towards our patterns and coming at it more from a place of that spaciousness, a place where we know we're whole while holding the pieces that are still stuck in time and navigating different experiences. And then there's also seeing them as a part of us and getting more of the backstory, getting more information into their intention and what they're there to do, or there's lots that we can dive into from that perspective. So it really is a can of worms. So what I'd love is, I of course want to keep diving deeper and have, be like, oh, let's explore this, Beth, and let's explore this, Macayla. But I'm also mindful of time, and we could go on all day. But what I'd love to know is like what is something that you could continue to play with? What is something that from today you could weave into exploring your own experience a little bit more after this call or with other experiences you have? What's a little a little thing that lands for you as a practice you could play with.
I mean, I haven't really heard of the panning out before, so I feel like that is a new concept then as of right now. So I feel like that would be worth exploring and playing with further for
Yeah.
sure. And then being more in the moment and noticing rather than, I mean, I feel like I am in the moment, but all of those, the steel walls always playing on the past and like fears of the past that you're bringing to the future. So like, yeah, just being more in the moment of noticing that and playing the pan out game.
Yeah. I like it. The pan out game. And I do, I talk about that a little bit in some of the earlier episodes, episode 3, I believe. And in the experiential guide, there's prompts and the opportunity for you to like reflect on that if it's helpful. Like you could download that and use that as a reminder. But also, what's more important to me is like what landed for you so you don't need the external resource to prompt you, right? Both are
Yeah.
important. The external resources to remember, but then also this internal, like, oh, right, when I did that, that felt so different. And I want to play with practicing or exploring what else I can experience through that.
Mhm.
Yeah. You know what I noticed is what really landed is, again, it's the pan out, but it's panning out not with my mind, like, oh, how can I look at this differently? It's panning out is, oh, what do I notice in my body? Not my thoughts, my thinking. It's was so immediate and simple. Whereas the thinking part of it, if I pan out, what do I see differently? Is effortful and
Mhm.
creates its own then or could be contraction. So what I'm saying is panning out just with noticing is immediate, it's spacious, it's so freeing.
Mhm.
And there's no agenda. There's no what's the new story. It's more the noticing, the sensations, physical reactions.
I love you naming that difference, Beth. Like, I can think about panning out, but it's effortful and I don't really notice that much of a difference. And I'm sure other people can relate to that because this concept of panning out, it might just be a concept versus the felt experience of like, oh, it's an energetic experience, right? Where I'm expanding out to encompass more of my experience and I'm holding myself more in my sovereignty, expanded out and noticing the layers that are involved in my human experience and my soul's experience and my spirit's experience. But I can hold it all from this more expansive place. And it feels very different than when we just do it with the mind. So I really appreciate you pointing that out. And I love that that's landing for you. And to me, there's such a beautiful practice that comes from finding coherence, finding where we are already whole and where we're organized. Because when we hold that, the pieces of us that are disorganized recognize that something else is possible. And ultimately, we want to be regulated. We want organization within all realms of our experience. So the more we connect into that experience of wholeness and that more panned out piece, it allows the pieces that aren't yet that, this is tuning forks, but in a different way, right? We're holding one frequency to invite the other frequencies to become attuned to that. And it allows the shifts that are possible to happen with so much more ease. Again, not always easy. It can be super messy. And the more you do this work, the more you reveal, then you're like, ah, but
Mhm.
you
Exactly.
know,
This layer, this onion
yeah.
is way more layery than I thought.
Totally. Exactly. Yeah. Uh, and it's an ongoing practice because it's easy to get pulled back into vortexes and in our patterns and in those inner layers. And this is where, to me, the simple practice of pausing and noticing is key. Because if we can pause and notice, then we can be like, oh, I'm aware of what I'm experiencing and I'm in one of those inner layers. And how do I start to get curious about that? And from there, noticing if I'm trying to fix it or trying to solve the problem and how can I instead pan out, come at it more from this place of like, oh, okay, there's that spaciousness. And it makes sense that all of this is happening. And I can still hold it and come at it with curiosity and ride some waves and discover what else is possible. But I can do it with more space instead of this conflicting, challenging way of trying to find my way through.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm going to be a little, I don't know what the term is, but when I pan out and just not from that thinking place, I feel like I'm not alone doing this. Like there's just this
Mm.
sense of, because when I'm thinking about panning out or I'm thinking about how can I think, it's just me trying to do it all by myself. I feel alone in this.
Yes.
And there's a sense of, but I'm not alone. Like I know I feel beyond me physically and my mind and the edges of my physical body, if that makes sense to people. It's for me it does.
Yeah. It makes tons of sense to me. And I think that's such a beautiful experience to live in when we recognize we're not alone. And yeah, thank you for naming that, Beth. And hope like I can feel it with the two of you. I can feel the container and the connectedness in such a different way when we notice ourselves as linked into this network that we're all part of. Right?
Mm.
Especially when we're doing this work and it can be so lonely in the process. To tune into this is really powerful.
It's very
Yeah.
powerful. I agree.
Yeah. Can you also feel that when you're more connected to this, the need to seek changes? The need to be like trying all the things or doing all my practices and there's a very different experience. How do you notice that change?
I mean,
Well,
I
for
still
me,
feel like I'm
sorry.
taught in wanting to do all the things, but they just feel good, and I know they're good for me a lot of the time, you know? I don't know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thanks.
For me, I feel so resourced. Like I don't in that moment feel like, oh, I've got to go do this. I need to go in the ocean. I need to run. I need to be in the forest. I feel just this sense of inner resourcing, but it's not even just my own resources. And so there's a sense of real just being okay in the moment. And it's this
Mhm.
moment. And I'm not saying all this because this is easy. I'm saying all this because this is what I'm noticing. And it's from having some sort of cue to be like, right, pan out, because it's so easy to live not in this like,
Yeah.
but it's all here. It's like I'm Dorothy with the ruby slippers.
I love it. And it like Michaela said, it's not that you can't do your like, go for a run, but you're gonna run in a different way.
Yeah, it's
Use the
gonna feel
tuning.
less constrictive, it's gonna feel less dark, it feels like it's actually like healing you and not you're just running from something.
Yeah.
Not running from my constriction, I'm running because it's renewing a part of me to do those healthy things, you
Mhm.
know? But not out of like a running from it, not running from things, not
Mhm.
trying to like replace whatever inside of you can't be fixed or whatever. You're not running from it or trying to get away from it, but it's like a part of encompassing and nurturing being able to release whatever's happening inside.
Well, and it might get to a point where you don't even need to release anything. It just releases, right?
That'd be really
Or
great.
or yeah, the need to go for a run or use the tuning forks or eat a certain well, eating's a whole nother ballgame, but doing certain things isn't even needed after a while,
Yeah, right.
right? The impulse comes from a very different place or the impulse changes.
Right.
Yeah. So my invitation to all of us ongoingly is to pause and notice, right? To be with our experience and notice, are we in a pattern? And then do we have judgment or are we trying to fix or are we frustrated with the pattern? How do we pan out and see all the layers at play? And just to ongoingly play with this practice. Like, oh, as I draw a bath tonight, am I doing this because I want to settle myself because I'm feeling overwhelmed and this is a great resource I'm going to use? okay, great. And can I also pan out and notice my impulse to have the bath changes? Still have the bath, but it's coming from a different place because I've actually just changed the state of that activation that was present before. Right? So it's an ongoing practice. I'm not saying this is easy, but to me, the pausing and noticing and playing with this makes it easier to have more grace for what's happening for us, right? To create more space around what's happening for us, to understand more of like, oh, of course I want to fix it. I'm so frustrated with this. And how do I get to know these patterns a little bit more and support myself to move through the layers of all of that?
Yeah, I think it's more like playful, like to go for a run and noticing that maybe I'm going for a run because I'm doing, like
Yeah,
maybe it feels more playful. And maybe you can laugh at yourself because you're doing that and you're like, oh,
totally.
maybe doing the things again, and like
Yeah.
maybe that will be more of a um it might trigger me to come, like that might trigger me to come and be back just and feel yourself, when you notice that you are doing all the things, but it doesn't feel you don't feel the weight. You're not doing the things because you feel the weight. It's like you're noticing and maybe you're like, oh yeah, I'm still doing the things. It's more playful and light, possibly.
Yeah, yeah. Or I'm doing the run because I am feeling the heaviness and, oh, now I pause to notice and now I'm aware of it. And now I get to play with untangling it a little, but still go for my run and be in the heaviness of it. But wait, right? Like again, ongoing practice and the playfulness makes it so much more fun because otherwise all of this is exhausting, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. For
Yeah.
sure.
Amazing. Anything else either of you want to add before we sign off?
No, like you said, I could be here all day. So, no, but this has been really good. Thanks for having me today and exploring
Yeah.
this a bit. And you're full of wisdom, and you embodies, like, you seem so calm, and it's nice. It's been a nice hour of chatting with you.
Right. Yeah. I'm grateful for you to have been here, Michaela, and the willingness to step into the unknown of all of this. Yeah.
Ah, it's kind of fun.
Yeah. How about you, Beth? Any last words?
Yeah. I came in pretty, I don't know if activated is the word, but yeah, in quite a little state from phone issues, tech issues, and um, but what this just, and I've been doing a lot of IFS and other things, but this is so simple. And I think the panning out, I don't, I know on some level I knew that, but something shifted
You had an embodied
with that.
experience of it, right? Like there
Yeah,
was an embodied, like, oh, this. And you rode through the wave first. That's
yeah,
helpful.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate what Macayla said about being playful with it, right? Like there's the ability to be playful now. Like I feel like I could be playful. When I came in, there was no play anywhere happening. Like the idea of play, what? I don't think so. So yeah. So I really appreciate that, Michaela, that you
I
said
feel like
that.
you even look more playful now, Beth.
I feel so much different than when I got on the call. Yeah,
That's
Yeah.
yeah. And less statuesque than when I was on when we first started.
Yes. Yes.
I
Yeah.
mean, it can feel like a dungeon, or you might as well play with it.
Mm.
Exactly.
Mm.
Exactly. Yeah.
And thank you, Nicole. This has been so fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for being willing to play. And I love that you came in more of an activated state and in more rigidity, and that you really got to get curious in such a simple way and land in that big shift and recognizing the simplicity of practicing panning out. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I appreciate your nervous system coming in hot and just your willingness to explore and play within the subtleties and to recognize the value of being in the subtleties. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thank you. And for those listening, thank you for doing your own explorations. Hopefully, you also learn something about yourself and see where it takes you. Thanks so much for listening. I hope that this episode has provided you with new perspectives and insights, and if you haven't already, head to my website to download the experiential guide. Until the next time, I invite you to continue to pause and notice.